So it's daytime here at Christmas at the Hormans, and I thought I'd do a little bit of a behind the scene video. Been 3 years since I did one. So you can see here we have our arches up front, and then our ground elements, which are mini trees and stars. We have our countdown clock over there with our second mega tree and a house outline. We have the 4 windows are all done with very high dense grids. We'll look at those. And then we have our 4 big coral flakes, of course our huge grid, our original mega tree, and then this here is a section of grids that does the snowmen that are having a snowball fight. So let's look back here first. Nothing too special about our arches. There's 6 of them, but this is nothing that's not been done before. So basically this is just Plex tubing here with a strip laying down inside. Now I've seen a number of people following the 2-inch Plex. We actually use 1-inch. And then everything is made with PVC. So you can see down here that we have PVC feet with PVC legs that come across. One PVC pole that goes up, which provides support and helps it keep its shape, coming back down over to there. And then as the lights come through, they actually get daisy chained. So it's probably more easy to see over here, but the wires actually come through the Plex tube and through the tube and out the edge here underneath this brick, and you can kind of see there's power, and then that one over there, black one, is data. So one of the things about the way we do things is power and data are always kept separate, even if they're using the same power supply like they are here, and it just gives me some flexibility in case I want to change things. So here we basically see one of our more exposed to the elements items, but this worked quite well. You can see on the bottom there's a 12-volt power supply with a sitting on top is a AlphaPix controller, and we're just using 1 port on that controller because all 6 are daisy chained together. You can see down there there's another box, and that is for power. So these 3 are supplied via the first power supply, and these are supplied via the second. Now we probably could have done it with 1 power supply, honestly, because we've turned down the power. They only run at 50%, but because we were using very high density strip within there, I actually designed it under the assumption that we would need 2 power supplies. If we take a quick focus at the yard, you'll see that there are 44 stars and 43 trees. The stars are in a 8-foot spacing, with then trees kind of in the middle of them. So it gets kind of a nice, where it looks like it's kind of straight going down. At least most of the time. It's not perfect here, but it looks pretty nice at night. The stars are dumb pixels. So we used to use some of the older plastic ones that are actually recommended by Holiday Coro. In this case, I was having so many failures with those that I switched to just using dumb pixels, but use actual pixels, and then cut the tops off of some of these trees, right? So these trees are from Boiscoyo. The stars are from Holiday Coro. I just got some extra stars for the top of these trees, cut out the little tab, and they happen to fit just perfectly in here and make a really nice effect when they light up at night. Then you can also see behind here is one of the dumb controllers just sitting there, and there's a bunch of those kind of scattered throughout the yard. So there's one there's one kind of behind that one there, and they just kind of keep going back. All right, those guys are than all DMX, and probably should have been, now that everything else is pixels, would have been better to maybe make those as pixels, but since they already had the equipment, they've stayed dumb pixels ever since. The trees, on the other hand, are pixels, and the way that those work is that those are all hooked up to a F16 that is kind of sitting way back here in that gray box, right? And then we also have some, so that F16 basically has the daughter board in it so that it could send out to the additional 4-port controllers. I'm forgetting what those extra things are called at the moment. But then I have like one in here and a few of those throughout the yawn, in addition to just power injection as well for the mini tree. So that's basically just a power supply. Each of the wires coming off of the power supply, so there's 3 wires coming off the power supply. Each wire connects to 3 trees, and then each row of the trees is daisy chained into 1 port. So basically we're using with all the cards, so that would be 1 row in the back, and then the second row, those would be on 2 different ports from our expansion boards that are there. So that's pretty much it for the yard elements. So again, lots of power supplies and dumb controllers just kind of scattered around, nothing too amazing. If we come over here, this is our countdown clock, one of the oldest elements in our display. So the bottom half is actually a pixel grid, and that pixel grid is quite interestingly constructed because it's old. You can basically see that we just took some pipe and basically created a nice little shape out of it and soldered it. That's a horrible solder job. Don't ever try to do something that bad with real pipe. But then we just took mesh and wired it in there. I think there's way better ways to do it, but this was one of our first attempts at putting together a grid. And it's quite high dense with 1-inch spacing there. And then the top half, where we actually have the numbers for the sign, you can see this is just that mesh that is sold. Both Holiday Coro and Boscoyo sell something similar. This one here is basically just there within the lights are shoved into, you can kind of see we have a number 8 pattern. So there's not lights in every single hole, but rather lights are just put into a pattern of an 8. That way I can make any number I want at the top in any color, and then the grid can say some message at the top. Now, interestingly enough, these are 12-volt pixels. These are 5-volt pixels. And this is an example of why we do our power separate from our current. And now you'll see this box looks like a huge mess, because there's one other thing that's in here. So here we have an AlphaPix controller, and you can see that it's actually getting 5 volts of power from one of the power supplies that's powering the grid down below. But that same AlphaPix controller is also powering the grid up top, which is 12 volts. So in that case, we're only taking the data. Again, we always just run data from our controllers to everywhere, and then power comes separately. So here we have, there's a 12-volt power supply that's doing the top of the grid, and then also in here are 2 5-volt power supplies down at the bottom that are powering the bottom. And then you can also see that what we have right here, this is actually for switching 110. So we built something kind of special that uses DMX and allows us to switch 110, and that can do things like turn on and off some strobes that aren't actually mounted here. They get mounted on Christmas Eve. And it also allows us to turn off that sign, which gives our radio station, by switching off 110. Those are the last of the incandescent bulbs that we have. Everything else is now pixels. So I realize this looks kind of like a mess. This is by far the messiest box that we have. Again, if you look, all of those wires running over there and here are power injection. In reality, this is not the right way to do power injection. But again, this was one of the first ones that we learned upon. And this particular element is 5 years old, and knock on wood, believe it or not, haven't had to change. I've had to change just one pixel in that entire grid for its lifetime, which I think is pretty amazing. So normally the lid is sitting on top of this with some board on top and bricks to keep water out. You'll see over here that this is one of our mega trees, and this is kind of a more common design, and you can kind of see what we usually do look like for the water ingress. Right, to keep water out is where we just put the board on top, and like that. And I was in this one today to fix something, so really this board should probably be just a little bit more like that to keep water out. Now this is actually quite interesting. So the base of this, you can see this is a 2-inch steel pipe, right, with that I can then ratchet up to make it go higher and stuff. But the base of this is actually quite interesting. So rather than burying it in the ground, because I wasn't exactly sure where we were going to put it, this is actually just in concrete. So that whole thing is concrete, and then there's a little bit of water and ice on top right now. But with that concrete, the thing is quite heavy. It gives me a nice solid base, and this thing is not going anywhere, despite some disbelievers out there. It's held up very well in the winds. Then of course we have nice steel cable, which is quite taut, coming back, and then these augers go, these are 16-inch augers that go on the ground, and we also put some steel blocks on top just to make sure that it didn't go anywhere. Okay, so that, even though there's a F16 in there, the F16 is hardly used. So what I mean by that is only 4 ports of the F16 are used to power up 4 strands. The strands have 1,000 pixels each as they come out here. And then you can see that this is just one of those power injection wires. So here is the control coming in for all of these guys on this side. So everything from that all the way to the end, that's the control. And the control wire just goes up, down, up, down, up, down. And then we can see here that this is the power injection coming through. So there's one power supply that does each strand. Okay. Well, really 2 strands on I guess. But anyway, if we look over here, these are Brilliant bulbs from Holiday Coral. They're nice. They look really good at night. They are probably the element that I have to work with the most throughout the year. It feels like on average I have 1 failure a week or every other week, somewhere in there with these guys. Usually they will fail bright. So oftentimes what I mean by that is one of the colors, so red, green, or blue, will get stuck on, but it'll still propagate signal. So if that happens, then I'll just come through and put some black tape over it to get it kind of through the season. But then, in fact, you can probably see right here is one such example where I just took the case off and then put black tape on it, and I think this one here is constantly on green, right? But they also will sometimes fail and just stop propagating signal, in which case you gotta cut them out and replace them. Now, this looked really nice until we had all the heavy snow, but one of the things that we try to do is line these up very nicely, as in straight lines. And so the way I do that is I kind of hang a pole that goes across the top, and then pull the wires back and line them up, and then I have a special pattern that I play on the lights that's like a one for red, so it's basically like a red and then a green and then a red and then a green, so that way I know when I'm hanging the lights how to hang them so they're exactly parallel and exactly lined up, so that then when we do wipes and up and down, that it all looks correct. Unfortunately, that heavy snow kind of crushed things, and now you can see that some of them are laying on the ground, so it's not quite as nice as it once was. The outline on the house is pretty standard stuff. So again, those are just 12-volt pixels, and those 12-volt pixels are on some pixel strip from Holiday Coral, and then they are hanging off of some gray PVC pipe, and that just helps them hang straight to make it easy to put up. So what I have to do is I just actually keep them all in 10-foot sections. They come down in 10-foot sections, and then I can just carry them down in the basement and pack them away like that. There is one power supply that is sitting on the roof, and that power supply provides power from here all the way down to there. Plus it also provides power on that one and going clear across on the ridge line. Excuse me. The windows are kind of interesting. So luckily we have some nice shelves for the windows to sit on. So what those are is those are basically the 1-inch spacing mesh that you can get from Borscoyo, and then we've cut them down to size, and then again we actually just use some water pipe, some copper water pipe, to build a nice little rectangle and then strung it in there. And then they sit right on the window ledge like you see there, and then from keeping them to fall down, you can see that there's one strap going across here and one strap going across the top, right? In reality, it doesn't look too bad at night, although sometimes you can kind of see the straps, but it's pretty rare that you end up seeing those. These are actually Coro strips, the Coro flakes from Holiday Coro, and those Coro flakes basically have those Coro flakes basically have those flat square pixels in them, and so they basically will have, I believe it is 8 or 9 on each leg, so they will have like 3 kind of going down the pipe, and then they'll have them coming out here, so that we can do some kind of interesting patterns with them, because each one is individually controllable. We talked about how the stars are all dumb pixels. This is one of the original stars. It's the last one that still has the old square or rectangle plastic pixels in them, and I just hadn't replaced those because they hadn't failed yet. All the other stars had failed multiple times before, but for some reason this one hadn't, and but it'll get replaced for next year. So of course our grid is pretty much the highlight of our display. So we do have some professional framing that we have put in place with very nice anchors to kind of hold it up. They come back in front, they come back down the sides, they do a crisscross pattern behind, so you can kind of see them there above the door. And then there's actually tie-offs going from there all the way back behind the house as well, just to keep everything secure so it doesn't move around. The grid is actually divided into 2 because they were built for AlphaPix 4, which only supported 64 pixels per strand. So in reality, with the AlphaPix 4, you couldn't actually control this entire grid. You needed 2 of them. So the grid actually kind of splits down the middle, at least logically. Physically it doesn't, but logically it does. And so you can see that you'll have wires running across the bottom here. They kind of get bigger and bigger and bigger until they run down. So that has both power and data. And then they run up, most of them are power, and they just kind of run up to the proper data injection point that's up there, right? Then we have this box over here, which has the left side, has the 4 power supplies for the left side. Again, we don't need 4 power supplies, but I built it assuming we were going to run the pixels at 100%, which we don't anymore because it's way too bright. But there are 4 power supplies in there and 1 controller. Same thing on this side where we have 4 power supplies and 1 controller to control this side, right? So when we take this down, it actually comes off of that pole. So you can probably see at the top, there's some zip ties up there. You just cut all those zip ties off, and then this folds up quite nicely to be put on a cart that we can move it and then store it away. Again, this is a good example. We've already talked about this, but this is a good example of power injection. So you can see that what we do here is, again, we usually tend to make very, very long strands for everything that we do. But of course we run out of power. So in this particular case, this is just a power coming into it, right? And that's actually a 12. The cord is actually that's actually 14 gauge, or maybe it's 12. I'm not sure. Wire, and then there's just a little point right here to, go ahead and inject power. And then this right here is basically just a single two-prong port. So basically it just has power injection coming in. And then up in here, basically, we just inject power on both sides, and then the power can flow both ways. So that way, if we inject every 200, it'll send power backwards 100 and power forwards 100 to make sure things don't go dull. And then the control wire just kind of continues through. Everything is fused at the power supply. So our power supplies have a little, I don't have one here, but I could show a picture of it. The power supplies actually have little inline fuses that are inside of those boxes right there. So now this is an interesting one. So here the bush that we had actually died. So we had two big bushes there and they died, and we started to put replacements, and the replacements aren't doing very good either. But so just to get around that problem, I just made something out of plastic to put the lights on, and lo and behold, PVC works really well. So here's a nice up close shot of those window grids. So those window grids are using 5-volt pixels, so there is a lot of power injection, which is why you see some of the bulk wires there. But you'll notice that even though there's more pixels here, there's far less lines for power injection than we saw over at that countdown clock, because we've learned how to do it right. And I'll show you that on the back of the snowman here. So again, this is how we did the outline on this side of the house. That's actually just fence pole, and so the fence pole actually provides the support and keeps it straight, and then the PVC is mounted next to it to actually secure the pixel lights to it. Again, another mega tree, so nothing too surprising here. We'll look back here. Now these things kind of got messed up by the wind, and I think we'll have to support them a little bit differently next year. But these snowmen are actually just a high density grid, right? So 1-inch spacing. And then here we have the 2-inch spacing, which does the cannon and the splashes on the ground. And then we have another 2-inch spacing going the other way, which are slightly offset for doing the snowball going across the air, and then a repeat on the other side. So this entire thing, and unfortunately you kind of see that the wind's blown this around a little bit. We've learned a bit, this isn't the right way to do this with this pulley system. We don't have the right rope. The rope is actually stretching a little bit over time, which has caused some of these things to come down a little bit and not look so nice. Plus the wind has just really blown things around. So we'll be securing this differently next year. But in concept, it works quite well, where we basically have 1-inch pipe that's holding the frame together, and then steel cable that comes down in a lot of different spots to anchor everything to the ground. We get all 5-volt pixels, so there is a Falcon controller here, and we use almost all the ports on it. Each strand is 1,000 pixels long. So that go through, and basically a lot of these things are just kind of one big huge strand, and so there's actually like 4 of them in this snowman here, or I believe 4 of them, and then there's like 1.5 here, and then that thing I think is like 2 of them, etc. So it just kind of keeps all the way going down. But there's the controller sitting there. It does have, just because I already had this pre-built, it has its own power supply. But the power supply is only supplying the controller with power. It doesn't actually go anywhere because it's a 12-volt power supply. Don't ask, I got it from somebody else's display that I bought out. But it works well, and because for our design, again, for these 5-volt power supplies, we are just having power sent and injected everywhere along. So there you go. That's pretty much a tour of our display behind the scenes.